You have reached the Geek Elite. Good luck.
Hey, Mitch!
Hey, Mitch!
Hey, Mitch!
Hey, Mitch.
Hey, Mitch!
Hi-yo.
Mitch.
What up, Mitch?
Orderly, Mitch.
Hey, Mitch.
Hey, Mitch!
Hey, Mitch.
What up, Mitch? Hey, Mitch. Hey, Mitch.
What up, Mitch?
Hey, Mitch.
Hey, Mitch.
Hey, Mitch! Hey, Mitch,
Hey, Mitch!
Hey, Mitch. Hey, Wyatt. Mitch. Mitch. Hey, Mitch.
Hey, Mitch.
Hey, Mitch. Hey, Mitch.
And on tonight's episode of Hey Mitch, I am very thankful to welcome back Allie Wagner, also known as Miss Cat Cosplay. She was on the podcast way back in the beginning, so it's been a while since I've gotten to talk to her because we haven't had conventions in the last year. So it's glad to catch up with you, Allie. How are you?
I'm alive.
Good. Yes, that is what we can all thankful for.
Every day above ground is a good day.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, no, definitely missing conventions. It's crazy. This whole pandemic has put me in a very sad place because conventions were always like my home away from home. That kind of, it was like my break from reality. So now that I don't have that, I channel that into other means.
Which, definitely brings us to why we're here tonight. You have written a book.
What? I did a thing.
I mean, I as it states on your Instagram, this is your debut book. So how was this as a starting out for you?
Oh gosh. So ever since I was a wee child, I always wanted to be a published author. And, when I was 12, most kids are reading fantasy books and the kid genre. I was reading James Patterson, strangely enough. My parents were fine with that, oddly. So I actually started writing thriller books, and then my computer actually crashed and died when I was 15, and I kind of gave up on it. And then just recently, getting back into watching anime and reading manga and playing video games, this idea came to me hey, you should write about this. And I was like, no. I don't do that anymore. And then I know that this is just an audio recording, but I have a small library at home. And
I can see it.
You can see it. I love books. I'm a manager at Barnes & Noble. Books is my passion. So the more I worked at Barnes & Noble and the more I continued to read fantasy novels, I was this idea in my mind is just, it's forming more and more and more every day. It's growing. These characters are having backstories, and I haven't written a word yet. So I want to say about 2 years ago, just to get the idea out of my head, because I felt like it was suffocating me, but in the best way possible. I started writing on my phone, in the notes. I don't know if anyone has an iPhone here. There's the notes category. So I just started writing on notes, on my lunch break or breaks at work, and little did I know, I finished a book. I was like, well, what is this? And so I transferred it to a Word document, and sure enough, it was 200 pages as a Word document. I'm like, wow, I have a lot of free time on my hands. It was crazy. And then going through it, and I'm like, okay, well, I actually really enjoy what I wrote. And I didn't think anything would come of it until I made my best friend read it. And she's a huge avid reader like I am. And I'm like, look, I need you to be honest with me. Is this trash? Or is this it's okay? Let me know. So she read it and she was like, okay, I'm sorry. I don't know if we're allowed to curse or not. But
you are absolutely allowed.
Fabulous. Because I have a pod mouth.
So do I.
Fabulous. She was like, bitch, this is good. I'm like, no, really, I need you to be honest with me. How is it? She was like, look, I love you and I appreciate you, but when it comes to reading and books, I am super honest, and you have something here. And I was like, okay, so we kind of worked together. So I printed the first couple chapters, and her and I met at a Starbucks at 8 o'clock at night. And that actually became a ritual for months, where she would read the chapter, we would go through it together, and she would be like, this is inconsistent with this chapter. And I'd be like, okay, you're right. And I would kind of edit it from there. And it's gone through so many edits that what it originally started as is kind of like not it's its final form now. I feel like it was like a Super Saiyan from Goku. Like started off with my tail, and now I have cyan hair. And it's crazy because a year ago I tried to do traditionally publishing where you had to write this query letter, which is basically like, hey, this is what my book's about. Can you please publish me? And I got like 10 rejection letters, and I was like, ooh, if that's not a dream killer, I don't know what is. So I set it aside, and I kind of had this new idea that formed in the same world, but to make it YA fantasy. And YA fantasy is a huge, huge seller in genre right now. It's a booming market, especially in Barnes & Noble, and I know because I work there. And as I'm writing the YA fantasy, I'm like, God, I miss the original characters in the first book that I wrote. And I was like, you know what? Like, at this point, we're in quarantine. I got laid off from my job for a couple months, so what else am I going to do? So I decided to like go back into it's called Skin, and just kind of like really refine it and make it the best thing possible. And I started to like look into self-publishing, and for some reason when I first started, I was like, I don't want to self-publish. Like, no, that's like this easy way out. I am so sorry for ever saying that because it is not easy. Like, there's so many little things that go into self-publishing that I had no idea about until you actually like, go through with the process. So, decided to do it. And I briefly talked about it on a TikTok live. So I don't know how, but I kind of blew up on TikTok. I mean, not blew up. I have 20,000 followers, and they're great. And people like watched me on TikTok, and I was like talking about it, and they're like, oh yeah? So you're gonna like publish this? And I was like, well, I mean, like, I was thinking about it. They're like, so when is it gonna be available? And I was like, whoa. So just having people that aren't my best friend be excited about it made me excited for it, and actually pushed me into actually going into the self-publishing route. And so that's what I decided to do.
That's
sorry,
awesome.
I just word vomited all over you.
You know what? We want that information, so I'm happy to receive it.
Okay.
As you mentioned, the book is called Skin.
Skin.
It's and from the description that is on your social media, it is about a shapeshifter.
It is about a shapeshifter.
Give me how about you can give us some more information. What's the book about? Obviously, we don't want any spoilers. We want everybody to go out and buy the book and read it. So it's a paranormal romance. And let me tell you that when I first wrote Skin, I originally marketed it as a urban fantasy, which just means a fantasy set in today's day and age. And I was like, that's what it is, an urban fantasy. And then I realized that I read a lot of paranormal romance. And if you don't know what that is, it almost sounds like ghosts banging each other. And that's not the genre. I'm sure
that's definitely what it sounds like.
I was going to say, I'm sure there's people that want to buy that book too, though.
I mean, like, hey, we don't kink shame up in here, but...
No, not at all.
So a paranormal romance is basically a romance. It's a fantasy romance, but it has to do with, like, werewolves and vampires, fae, etc. So that's what paranormal romance is. So that's what this is. So I had to like go in and like add some more into it to make it like more in that category. So it is about it takes place in LA because write about what you know.
Yep.
So I live close to LA. And it's about this shapeshifter, but she is an actual shapeshifter. So she doesn't have any boundaries as to what she can be. She can be any animal at this point. So, but shapeshifters were wiped out 200 years ago by other preternatural creatures because they're like, ooh, you dangerous. You could like technically be us, and that's like not okay. So they were kind of threatened by the abilities that shapeshifters could be, and they're like, we're just gonna off you guys. So it was a mass genocide of shapeshifters.
Ooh.
So Kira, her nickname is Key. She goes by Key in the book. she inherited the gene from her great grandmother. So her parents are werewolves, but she is not. So knowing what her ancestors have been through, she decides to hide what she is and just say that she's a werewolf. Like, she can turn into a wolf, boom, werewolf. So the only people that really know what she is her boyfriend of a year, and that's important, and her boss. So her boss is the kind of like the head honcho of LA County, and he's a vampire. So he's in charge of all the vampires in all the cities in LA County and in LA. So he pretty much just hires her to be like his spy because she can be anything. He's like, I will give you money and I will throw money at you to just tell me what these people are doing. She's like, cool, I got that. So she's a very meek, shy person when you first meet her because she's very not trustworthy of other people, because if anyone knows her secret, she could potentially die. And she's like, I'm good. No thanks. So something happens to her. She gets ambushed in her apartment by werewolves. That's not really like a spoiler because it's kind of like it's in the back of the book. And she's left for dead. And so she decides that she had enough of being this weak, meek creature and decides to be pretty much a crazy bitch. She does a complete 180. So she's bloodthirsty, she's out for revenge, and she kind of has anger issues at the same time. So her plan is that the people who ambushed her, she's going to hunt them down one by one and kill them. But she's going to do it in the worst/best way possible, depends on which way you're looking at it. She's going to impersonate the people that they trust most and kill them. So she kind of turns into like a bloodthirsty assassin. It's pretty awesome.
Very cool. So in this world that you've created, is the paranormal, the fae, are they common? Like, does everybody know they exist, or is it more hidden stuff like, like what would be now, I guess?
No, that's actually a good question. So I made sure to establish kind of like a hierarchy. So yes, it's called the monster movement because humans label everything that goes bump in the night as monsters. Mm-hmm. So the monster movement happened 25 years ago. And pretty much what happened is with the expanding of monsters, more and more of them were tired of being in hiding. They're tired of being basically like lesser people, quote, quote, because humans didn't know they existed. So they wanted rights as well. And they wanted to come out to the public and be like, we're here, we exist. Boom. So they created this council. So there's one vampire for all of the undead. That could be like zombies, vampires, I guess would be your thing. One werewolf to rule all of the shifters, and I have like a ton of different were animals. It's not just werewolves. There's werelebears, wereleopards, werelions, weredragons. There's everything.
Dragons.
Yes, that's in the YA book.
Wow,
it's pretty great, pretty fabulous. One warlock to rule over all of the magic users, and one elf to rule over all of the woodland creatures. So this council of four actually meets with the president and his cabinet, and they have come together to establish laws and rights for monsters. Very
cool. I mean, that is extensive in the world building there now.
It is, yeah.
You talked a little bit about, like, you've been sitting on this thought, this idea for a very long time. What was it that was finally the kickoff, other than just saying I need to do this? These are the ideas. What was the original kickoff?
So I know this sounds really crazy, but if you talk to any author, they'll tell you the same things, is where their characters talk to them. And I'm like, am I a little crazy? Probably. But it's one of those things where, we're fine. It's where my characters just kept talking to me. And like constantly, like every day there was new situations that my characters were in. And I'm like, what do you guys, you don't even exist. Like, what are you doing? And finally it was to the point where like I could vividly see in my mind certain scenes happening. and they just wouldn't go away until I put them on paper. So that's what happened. I finally wrote what was in my head, and then it came out into words, and I was like, okay, I got that out of my system. And then like 2 days later, I'd be like, but what about this? I was like, oh gosh. So that's actually how it happened. And it's kind of like how I tell everybody, 90% of this was written on my phone. Just because it would just hit me at random times, and I would just bust up my phone and quickly write down what was happening and then transfer it to Word later. But yeah, that's pretty much the kicker. It was just one of those things where my characters wouldn't leave me alone, and I was like, all right, that's fine. And I got them out of my system.
So
it's not.
is the world of the paranormal, the Fae, is that just something that you know a lot about, or is that something you went and did some research on when you were writing this book?
You know what? I actually didn't do any research. It's mostly because for Skin, this is the one that takes place in LA. This is kind of like the book that started all of the side ideas and the side plots that have been happening. So it was really just Key and Kira's her name. Kane, who is the werewolf, and Lucas, who is the vampire. It's just those three that kind of developed, and between the three of them and their interaction, the world built outside of that. When it comes to the actual like Fae and woodland creatures, that actually happens in my YA fantasy book, and that one I did have to do research. So for my birthday, my husband and I actually went up to San Francisco for the weekend, and there's a place called Muir Woods, which is like right over the Golden State Bridge, and I set the setting for my YA fantasy there. And so I was like, I mean, pictures can only do me so much, so I need to experience it in person. So that's where we went. We did a 6-hour drive. Was it 6 hours? 6-hour drive? 5-hour drive? Something like that. And sat there for a weekend and went hiking, and I died hiking because I'm not an outdoors person at all. So like we were there for like 4 hours, and I was like, I can't do this. And my husband's like, keep moving, you're fine. Like, you wanted to do this, you'll be happy when you're done. Just do it. I was like, okay, it's fine. And it was so worth it. Like, I found so many like things that I wrote in my book. I was like, this is the boundary line, babe, look. And he doesn't know what I've written, but he's like, see, I told you. Aren't you happy you did it? And I was like, I'm so happy that I did it. So that's really the only one that I did research for. I do have another paranormal romance that I'm writing. It's halfway through, again in the same world, and this one I have done more research on because it's more Greek mythology and Egyptian mythology based. So I bought a Egyptian mythology book just to make sure I'm really getting everything correct and not messing it up. So that one is also in the works. So total, I've written Skin. I've written a sequel already. I've written the YA fantasy spinoff, and I'm halfway through the other paranormal romance that I've written in the same world. So it's crazy. And again, these are just things that they've come to me, and I'm like, gotta get it out on paper. So I like spewed it out into Word. I'm like, okay, now that it's out of my system, it's fine. But now that I'm actually publishing Skin, the possibility of publishing these other ones is kind of like, it's like I'm awestruck by it. So
that's awesome. Yes, the wellspring of ideas comes when you finally put it down. Like, that's amazing. Glad to hear it.
Yeah.
I know, of course, I know the answer, but just for everybody else, what would the difference between a YA fantasy and regular fantasy be?
So, this is actually a really good question, because working at Barnes & Noble, YA fantasy, and then manga are actually my sections. They call them like my bracket of the store. And everyone knows, like, if we have to move something, we have to ask Allie first because she'll hurt us. I'm like, exactly. Don't touch my sections. So YA fantasy, I originally thought meant that it was geared towards younger readers. Like, it was geared towards that age group of like 13 to like 18. And that's actually not true. I mean, while it's supposed to be relatable, so yes, people of that age group will flock to it. It actually means that the protagonist is between that age group. And I didn't know this until probably probably like 9 months ago, which it makes sense. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. And then adult fantasy, everything above that, and that's actually how YA fantasy books can get away with having a little bit of smut in them, which, of course, as a manager at Barnes & Noble is an issue sometimes for me because I have the angry parents that are like, what is my child reading? And I'm like, I don't know. What is it? But yet that's how they get away with it. So even though it is a young adult section, the protagonist is 18, which is a legal consenting age to engage in sexual activities. And so they do. I mean, granted, it's not like super graphic and detailed like in adult fantasy, but that happens a lot, as opposed to like adult fantasy. I mean, anything can happen. Like you have Nevernight, for example. Mia Craveri starts off as 16, and there's a lot that goes on in that book. It's actually this one right here. Fun. Sorry, it's a video. It's not a video, but we're a video. And there's smut, there's death, there's murder, there's everything in this book. So technically, if Jay Kristoff wanted to, that's the author, I apologize, he could have marketed that as a YA fantasy. But I think that because of all the MA content, he marketed it as adult fantasy, which I think worked out really, really well. But yeah, hope that answered the question.
It does. It really does. Does any book or any fantasy book that has a protagonist between that age, is it automatically considered YA, or can there be like a teenager in an adult fantasy book?
Definitely. I mean, that goes back to Nevernight. The main protagonist is 16 when the series first happens. I think technically Nevernight should be considered as a new adult, and new adult is kind of like this new genre that's popped up, and it's pretty much in between young adult and adult. So it has the YA writing with the adult content, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, a lot of places, for instance, like Barnes & Noble, doesn't acknowledge new adult as a section. It's like it's either one or the other, pick one. So that's kind of like a odd subject there. Because there are a lot of books that fall in that category that are in both sections. For example, the A Court of Thorns and Roses series, Feyre is 19 when this series starts, but when this series first came out, it was marketed as YA fantasy. She was 19. That, it's kind of like a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, but with a fun little twist on it. But there is some smut in it. It's very barely described smut, but in book 2, it's full blown smut. So we've had a lot of parents come in angry with their pitchforks, rallying that we're corrupting their children. And I was like, okay, well, first of all, I didn't read the book, and I didn't put it there. So in preparation for her new book, which Sarah J. Maas, she full on said that book 4 is going to be super duper adult smutty. And Barnes & Noble is like, okay, we're listening now. We're going to listen to the angry parents, and we're going to listen to the author. So they actually took that whole series out of YA, and they put it in adult fantasy, where it probably should have been from the beginning. But I think technically it would be a new adult book because it's 19, the smut.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So for creatures that are like your vampires and your werewolves, which by all accounts, because I don't know the answer, don't exist, did you add anything to that myth, to something that hadn't existed in other fiction at this point?
It really, see, the bad thing, did he leave?
He did. It's okay.
Okay, just want to make sure, is it still recording? We're still
I
there?
have my own recording going.
Okay, good.
I use Craig as a backup.
Awesome. It really just depends, because I mean, werewolves and vampires have been around in media and books for so long that it's so hard to find a unique concept of it. It's really hard to find something that's original and all that stuff. Because I've read several books of vampires. So that's kind of like my favorite, vampires and werewolves, like Paranormal Romance. That's like kind of like my favorite to read. So I have read a lot of different depictions of vampires and werewolves, and I think that my my favorite like niche vampire trait is that they're only awake at night.
Mhm.
Like that's, to me, that's what vampires should be. Like, I'm sorry, Twilight, that's vampires should only be awake at night. So
Well, the consequences for the vampires in Twilight during the day is a lot less severe than
like a disco ball. So for my vampires, they're mostly awake at night. For the stronger ones and ones that have been vampires for longer, for example, Lucas, he's been a vampire for probably about 300 years. He's also, they call him the Curse of Apollo because he grew up pretty much in Greece. And he's a pyrokinetic before he was turned. But back then, that's something that was never heard of, so they called him the Curse of Apollo. So Apollo being the Greek god of the sun and all that. So just in case nobody knows, I don't want to assume. So because of his affinity for fire, and because he is older, he can be awake during the day if he needs to, and then going out in the sun, it's not the best idea, but he can function. It's just very uncomfortable for him. But newer vampires, they will like pretty much combust as soon as the sun hits them. So his affinity for fire and him being older kind of gives him somewhat of like a leeway, but not like enough to be full out in the middle of the day in high noon, just chilling. He would die. For my werewolves, I think that's something to me that just makes sense, and I've kind of read it in a different book as well, is that procreating between werewolves is very difficult. And that's because, you know, the full moon calls on the shift of a werewolf. So if a female werewolf is pregnant in her human form and the full moon happens, the change is so hard on their body that the chances of a fetus living is not very high.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, logically speaking.
Yeah.
So, there are some wolves that are strong enough, and with the power of their alpha, you know, because, you know, an alpha controls the pack, and they have the strong aura and the command that they could, you know, they're bossy. Mm-hmm. And a lot of their pack has to listen to them. So with a strong female and a strong, like, pack leader together, it's very possible to resist the urge to change. But usually even then it's like 8 months is like the max, because like your body is like, gotta change. Like your inner beast is like dying to get out at that point. So that's how some of my werewolves are made, but most of them are bitten and turned. So that is a very unique and awesome addition. Like, that idea of the stress of the body has to come into play, and especially, since you're pregnant 9 months at a row, that's going to be 9 times at least 9 times that the moon goes full. Exactly.
I love that. When you were creating these characters, did you like have to do like big old diagrams of who each one is, or backstories that don't exactly end up in your book? Like, is basically what I'm asking is there just a whole bunch in your head and written down other places it's never going to be seen by anybody else who that doesn't, even if they buy the book and read it?
Probably. And even for the first book, I have 4 beta readers. They're the ones that read it before I announced it, basically to be like, hey, can I get you guys' ideas here? And I do a lot of interconnecting. Some of it isn't very obvious. Some of it is. Most of it is not, though. But to me, I'm like, yeah, I'm just gonna sneak that in there real quick. Even if it doesn't make sense to them, it makes sense to me. But I have written down like timelines and this person with that person because of this reason, like X amount of years ago. But it doesn't necessarily make sense like to the story. Mm-hmm. But for example, without like spoiling anything, there's a person that's mentioned in chapter 4 of the book, and it's a very fleeting mention. They're mentioned again halfway through the book, and then mentioned again at the end of the book. So unless you're really paying attention to names, you won't know that that's all the same person, but it's a very, very important connection for the second book.
Okay.
If that was your question.
I love it. Is there a whole map somewhere of how you have it, or do you just use the regular like Los Angeles City map?
Basically, the LA map. It was very hard to, like, for instance, like Key's apartment. I had to actually pull up a map and be like, where do I want her apartment to be relative to where her bar is and where the vampire's bar is. So for Shifters, which is a bar, and then Bite, which is another bar, I kind of just briefly was like, it's kind of around LA Live.
There you go.
Which is, yeah, so I'm like, good luck with that. But for her actual apartment, I found an apartment complex on Google Maps in a certain area that I was like, good, she lives there. Is the layout wrong? Maybe. I haven't gone and seen him in person, but close enough. So,
do you have any art depicted in the book, in like chapter heads or anything like that?
I don't. Because this is my first book, and I don't really know like how hard to go. I did have someone draw fan art of Key, which is lovely. But otherwise, I don't really have any art that goes with the book, just the cover.
I mean, I assume as a veteran costumer and cosplayer, you have a very good idea of how the characters would look if someone were to walk up to you at a convention dressed as your character.
Yes, if someone were to like come at me, I'd be like, "Oh my god, you're cute!" like I would know. Hopefully I would know. It's really funny because one of the characters, his looks is based off of my husband because he's handsome, but that's man. And it's funny because when I first started writing this character and my character, she was always supposed to end up with this character, and then I wrote a new character, and now she doesn't end up with the first character. So it's like, oh gosh, I'm sorry, babe. So a lot of people. It makes me sad because like I'm protective of my character because even though he has serious character flaws, he's still my character. And the fact that he looks like my husband makes me more protective of him, even though I've made him into such a way where people don't like him. Mm-hmm. I was like, no, that's my own fault. It's actually my character's fault because they were always supposed to end up together. And then as soon as I wrote the other character, that he just kind of took over. So.
I mean, that's the way that the characters went. That's the way the story went. It just happens.
Well, that happens. I mean, like, the original way that Skin started, that first chapter, is now, like, chapter 12 in the book. So it's weird how stuff like that works out.
Did you, the fact that you have crafted and cosplayed so much, did that come into mind while creating these characters? At all? Like, I mean, it doesn't have to. I was just wondering if it did.
Not really. I mean, the only thing that I could say is that there's a dress in book 2 that Key wears. And as I'm like describing it, I'm like, God, I want to make that. Like, that's pretty much the only thing of like where my actual like cosplay part has come in, where I'm like, I want to make that dress. I want that dress. But that's basically it for that.
What was the biggest obstacle that you came across while writing? Not so much anything else, but just writing.
Ooh, that's a good question. The biggest obstacle to actually write is probably finding the errors that I made. I know it sounds really weird. So I'm kind of dyslexic. So if a sentence says the red cat jumped over the brown fence, I will read it as the brown cat jumped over the red fence. And I won't notice the difference because as me, especially when I'm reading, as I skim a lot faster than I read out loud. So when you have an iPhone and you're writing on notes, the autocorrect will correct to something that's technically correct. And since I wrote it a certain way in my mind, I still read it in the way that I originally thought that I wrote it. So when I transferred it to Word, again, because it's still technically correct because autocorrect fixed it, I don't see the mistakes. So it's not until like my fourth reread where I'm like, why does this say she sat in a puddle through the roof? Like it's just something weird like that. That sentence didn't make fucking sense at all. But there's something weird like that. Where I'm like, I don't know. She like jumped over a puddle on the roof or something like that. That's how it was supposed to be. But it's not something you technically catch. So that was kind of like a challenging aspect for me because I had to sit there and meticulously look at each word and not just be like, I know this sentence, I wrote it, it's fine, because it really wasn't.
That's fair. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, and having to keep it all straight, would have that consequence. I understand. During pandemic, have you also been keeping up with cosplay and crafting, even though you haven't had any conventions to go to? I mean, not that you aren't too busy, because you're writing books. Like, I understand that.
I'm working on Ciri from The Witcher. I just have to make like her belts and her sword and stuff, but her actual outfit is pretty much done. I am making a book cosplay. Again, it's a Court of Thorns and Roses. It's one of the dresses on the cover. And then, bless his soul, but I am working on a commission that someone asked me to do probably back in like August. Mm-hmm. And I'm still working on it. He's been a gem, and thankfully there haven't been any conventions that he's been needing to wear them to. But I'm making, I don't know if you're familiar with Dark Souls. Mm-hmm. I'm working on the Greater Moon Sword. So he commissioned me for that, and so I'm still trying to finish that. And he's been, like I said, he's been such a gem. He's been so understanding about, because like my husband got COVID, and like back in like December, and then there's just been hiccups with like the actual crafting part of it, and like trying to get certain aspects of it the way it's supposed to look. So it's kind of like finding the right material to manipulate it in such a way where it looks like it's supposed to look, but it's also like not a real thing. So it's, you know what I mean? Like it's obviously not a real sword. So trying to make it look like one with all of its sharp angles and nicks and crannies and grooves are kind of what we're working on right now.
Okay.
I would say it's a little over halfway done. Yeah. This is actually it right here.
There it is. I can see it. When it is finally safe to have a convention like that, do you just imagine it's going to be a lot of cosplayers with a whole bunch of backlog, or souped up outfits and crafts? I don't know. I know that sounds really weird. I know that one of my best friends, Angie Viper, I know that you kind of did an interview with her too. Mm-hmm. I know that she's been kind of working on a bunch of stuff. She's just been kind of hammering it away, and which is fabulous. And I think that everything that she's done, people are going to be really excited to see. Me, on the other hand, I think that I've just been trying to focus on this commission and working on skin, that I haven't really been working on my own cosplay so much. Like I said, for Ciri, a lot of it was bought. It's like a little like peasant top, if you guys know adult Ciri, the brown like leather pants and all that stuff, the corset, those are all bought. I do have to actually make the belts and buckles and all that fun stuff that goes with it. But I haven't actually worked on a cosplay like from scratch like I normally do. There is one that I have been working on for a really long time. I told myself I was going to finish her, but I probably won't, because I can't in my mind figure out how to make her wings. But it's Blade Mistress Morgana from League of Legends. I have her actual outfit done. I have her gauntlets done. I have her claws done. But those big ass metal wings, I can't. My mind can't comprehend how to make it into 3D real life. So that's the struggle. So if I do make her, I'll probably just do it without the wings, which is kind of a bummer. But there you go. Hey.
I mean, everything else is done. To be ashamed to just not finish it just because of the wings. So
right, exactly. When conventions are a thing again, will you be taking the book or the books?
I don't know. It's really interesting, because with Skin, as excited as I was to actually get it published, and obviously I work at Barnes & Noble, so one of my big things was being able to get it into my store. Like, if there's no point in me being able to get it, then I can't promote it at my own job. it's kind of gonna be moot for me in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I know it sounds really pretentious of me, but that's just my goal. My goal is to have my book on my shelf
Yep.
at my job.
That's
Like, I know it sounds so simple, but it's not easy to do. So when I was first talking about skin and people were getting excited about it, I'm like, okay, like this is gonna be really fun. You know, maybe X amount of people have like a small little fan base. That'd be fabulous. So I decided to do the pre-orders on my Etsy because that was the only way I can get signed copies out to people who wanted it. And I was like, okay, I'll start with like 25. Like that's ambitious to me. I'll have some left over. It'll be fine. So, but the people that kept bothering me on my TikTok, and I mean bothering in like the best way possible, like
Right.
they're beautiful people. I told them like, okay, so the pre-orders are open if you guys really want it, and you know it'll be a signed copy of the book. I'll include a bookmark, a sticker, you know, a little thank you card from me to you, like thanking you for your support. So my pre-order sold out in 2 hours, and I was like, wow, like that's amazing. Holy snaps. So I made a video saying like how thankful I was, like, oh my god, you guys, like 25 are sold out. And I had a flood of people that are like, what? We didn't know. And I was like, so you want like more? I was like, I mean, like, okay. So I was like, okay, I'll do like another 25 and, you know, that'll be 50 eventually. Like maybe again, I'm thinking like maybe like 4 other people are going to buy it. Like that's fine. So the next 25 sold out in 30 minutes.
There you go.
And it was very, very overwhelming. I basically like called my husband. I was like, he's like, what? And I was like, oh, my pre-orders. It's, oh my God. And I was just so humbled because I didn't think that this was going to be a big thing. And I still don't think it's going to be a big thing. I think I just talked about it enough where people are like, okay, we'll give it a try. And I still have people on my TikTok that are like, so when is it ready? When can we order it? So it might just be like my TikTok community, like the book talk community in general, that's very much like, yeah, we want it. And that could just be that. So I don't know how it's going to do like in person, and especially in the cosplay community. I don't know if that's really going to be a thing. So I probably won't bring copies to conventions. If for some reason someone hits me up, and because in my bio on Instagram, I usually like, this is the next convention that I'm going to. If someone for some reason is like, hey, like I'm gonna be at this convention too, can I get a book? Then I'll be like, absolutely, yeah. But I'm not gonna make it a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I forget her name, but she's also a cosplayer who published a book, and she did the self-publishing like I am, and she had this whole like booth set up in the exhibit hall, and where she was selling her book, and I'm like, that's amazing, like good for you. I'm too needy and I need my friends, and I need to like walk around and like see all the cosplay. So I couldn't just sit there at a booth and sell my book. I'd much rather just be out and about and interacting with people. Plus, I know this is really stupid, especially because I just did it with you, but asking an author what their book is about is like the hardest question ever. It really is. I know it sounds so silly, but like, and having to do that all day would just kill me. Like it's so hard.
I know. No, I mean, I completely understand. I've interviewed a few authors now, and it does seem awkward to be like, hey, I'm going to put you up on this pedestal and make you sit there and talk about your book and what exactly is it about and why should people like it. But like, I
know when you first asked me, I was like, oh, I don't know.
I mean, the hope is that it's going to help you out with, you know, at least getting more people to see it. Not that apparently you need it. 20,000 people, you know, wanting your book already is going to be a great fall for you. Come on.
I wouldn't say 20,000 people. A lot of times people follow me on TikTok because I'm kind of crazy, and I do really weird like book reviews, and I do like really like odd videos. So most of my followers are probably from there, but I am part of the book talk community. So I've shown up on a lot of people's like For You pages just simply for like book reviews, which is fabulous because I love talking about books. Just not my own, but I love talking about books. And I appreciate you taking the time to do the interview. Like I was very happy that you asked me. I was nervous, but I was happy.
No, I was, just seeing that you were taking on a new endeavor. I mean, obviously I'd been following you since our last interview, and it's great. I love to see people, branch out and do the thing that they're passionate about. And obviously writing has been something for you for a while.
Yes. I've always wanted to be an author, and just like actually doing it is it's kind of crazy. It's crazy.
You know what? And you're the passion you have in your voice for the story sells the book. So I wish all the great for you.
Oh, thank you.
What's the last 3 books that you read?
Oh, I'm currently reading A Court of Silver Flames, which is book 4 of the Akatar series. And then I've been making my way through the Keystone Crossbreed series by Danica Dark. It's another paranormal romance because I like spice in my books. And that's actually a really, really good series. It's also about like mages and vampires and shifters, but these are the vampires that they walk around during the day, and then these shifters are they're just called like shifters in general, but they could be like anything. It's mostly like leopards, but they just call them leopards.
No, leopards.
Yeah, shifters, but the leopard breed. So yeah, those are like the books I've been reading lately.
So between writing books, reading books, working full time, cosplay, crafting, like when do you find time to sleep?
What's that?
Yeah.
I don't understand the word. What is sleep? I don't even know what that is.
Don't need it. Got it.
Yeah, I usually stay up pretty late. That's how I get like my League of Legends time in, because League of Legends is actually like one of my. It's weird because it's such a toxic environment sometimes, but it's my stress reliever because I just get to kill people. And plus, one of my best guy friends duo was with me, so we're like we just play together in the game, and so just talking with him sometimes, like any of my best friends, is very like stress relieving. Just yep. And then of course my husband. It's sad because my husband and I sometimes work off hours, because most of the time I'm 9 to 5:30, but sometimes I'm like 12 to 8:30, and at that point I won't see him. So I usually get like 2 hours with my husband a day, maybe, and that makes me sad. But that's like that's also my relaxing time is with him.
I mean, any way you can find it, obviously. So, what's the thing that you geek out about that most people wouldn't expect?
Besides books, Jay Kristoff. He is my favorite author.
Okay.
Probably of all time. I know it's really weird, but like, he's just a fantabulous person. He's from Australia, and he's just like so down to earth, and he actually like respects his fans and like isn't just like, okay, yeah, you're a fan, cool. Like, he takes time to actually like sit and talk with you. We're actually working on something together for his new book that's coming out in September. Again, very humbling. Another thing that I probably really geek out about is giraffes and coffee mugs.
Okay.
I collect coffee mugs, and I go a little apeshit about giraffes. I saw my first giraffe in person like 3 years ago. There was one at Lake County Fair, and I didn't know it was there. My husband did. He's like, let's go over here. There's live animals over here. And I was like, yeah, it's fine. Let's go. And lo and behold, there was a giraffe, and I just broke down crying. Like, I was Kristen Stewart, or was it Kristen Stewart? Kristen Bell, when she saw the sloth for the first time on the Ellen show. That was me with the giraffe. Bawled my eyes out like a little bitch. It was great. Yeah. So those are probably the 2 things. Well, 3 things if you count a person.
So I have to ask, because my fiance also collects coffee mugs, and as a person who doesn't drink coffee myself, before she moved in, I had maybe a coffee mug. What do you do with all your coffee mugs? Like, I'm thinking, do I need to build like some type of tree or like a place on the wall to hang all these mugs? I have so many mugs in my house now. Probably.
Okay. So before I actually started collecting coffee mugs, we would just get like some that are in like the little kits that come with like the plates and the bowls, like the matching sets.
Uh-huh.
So we have a bunch of those, and they kind of fill up our cabinet because they're on the very, very top because we don't use them. And then for some reason, I had like a wild hair at my ass. I start collecting coffee mugs. And so right now they're kind of all over the counter near the Keurig because there's no room. Because I'm too lazy to go up there and throw away the matching ones for the bowls that we don't use. Like, let's be real, I'm lazy. But also, if they go all the way up there, they won't be able to reach them. So I'm kind of in a conundrum at the moment.
Makes sense. I love it. So you talked about the book, and it's a world. You have many books coming out in that world. Do you have a number in your head of where the books stop, or is it just open to go on forever?
So for the actual Skin series, it was originally supposed to be a trilogy. Skin, Shift, and Sever would be the 3 titles. If I go with the quartet and do the 4th book, it'll be Solitude. But it should be no more than 4.
Okay.
For the YA spinoff, it should be a duology, possible trilogy. And then for the other paranormal romance, it takes place in Vegas. It's gonna pretty much be like a series with like a different crime in every one.
Wow.
So it could be one of those things that go on forever, one things that don't. Like for instance, Laurel K. Hamilton, she has written 28 books. They're all connected, and you have to read them in order, but they're all individual stories.
Oh.
I won't go that far because, like, as a reader, I'm like, oh my god, yet. But it has a potential to be, but I won't know until I write it. So Skin right now is the only one that I know is going to be either a trilogy or a quartet.
Any plans to go back to the Patterson-like thrillers that you went away from?
The closest thing would be the paranormal romance that is taking place in Las Vegas.
Okay.
Because my main character, her name is Valkyrie, but she goes by Val. She is a hellhound, and she was marked as a hellhound by Cerberus, who is the guardian of the underworld.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty much, like, what he does is they give... I say they because it's also the Fates, if you guys know. If you ever watched the cartoon Hercules, the 3 sisters with the one eyeball, they're the Fates. Basically give her a really bad person that she has to mark for death. So as a hellhound, she lives like in the current like human world. And they're like, hey, this is a bad person, mark them for death. That way when they die, they'll get sent to us. Because if you don't, then they'll go to a different realm of hell. So that sounds really crazy. But if you've ever read like any other like mythological or even like Dante's Inferno, there's several different realms of the underworld. So there's the Greek one that we're doing, and I'm also doing like Anubis and their underworld. So that's kind of like where my Greek and my Egyptian are coming together. And so if a certain soul isn't marked by a certain entity that correlates with it, they won't end up in that spot. I know it sounds really weird, but it's working so far in the book.
Good.
So she's also a detective for the preternatural branch. So she's works in the monster branch of investigators for homicide people. So I have a bunch of dead strippers in the book right now, and they're trying to figure out who it is. So it's weird to explain it, but it's working so far as a book.
I like it. It sounds good. Now, I know you said that one of the characters is very much based off your husband, but let's say 10 years down the line, 5 years down the line, it hits, it's super big, like we know it will. Casting director comes up to you and says, did you have anybody in mind when you were writing these characters?
So my husband would be Cain, who is the one I was telling you about, my werewolf. But as for everyone else, it's really weird. So for my main characters, you have Key, who is in this book. You have Bay, who is my fantasy girl, and then you have Val, who is in the Las Vegas one. So Key is kind of I guess a reflection of me. I don't want to say that she is me because I don't go around killing people.
That we know
But she's
of.
gone through. Yeah, okay, don't give away my secrets. She's gone through the transformation that I have. So when I was younger, I was a meek, weak little girl, and I was severely picked on, severely bullied. Until one day I was like, "Fuck this, fuck you, you're cool, I'm out," kind of a thing. So that's kind of like me and Key. So she's like a reflection of myself. I wouldn't say that she is me. She has my hair color. But that's pretty much it. Bay has my anxiety, and like the self-doubt that I've had as a person. And then Val kind of has my I don't really give a shit about what you think attitude now. So it's really weird. They all have like a sliver of me, but they're not me, if that makes sense.
No, that makes absolute sense. What was the biggest problem that you came across in self-publishing that you weren't expecting?
The cost.
Okay.
It's very weird because when you do traditionally publishing, all you have to do is be like, you have to query a literary agent with like this super short but sweet letter saying what your book is about, why they should publish you, and why it's different. But they get hundreds of those a day, so it's so hard to like stand out. But if you do traditionally publishing, you don't have to pay anything up front. They handle everything. So just the process of alone of self-publishing is very overwhelming. So you have to do a cover designer, and then you have to do like an interior designer, which is basically like your formatter, because you can't just go from Word straight to publishing. It doesn't work that way. Has to be a certain font, has to be certain margins, has to be a certain spacing between each lettering. The indentation of each paragraph has to be a certain way. And then you have to have like an editor, and then you have to, in my case, you have to buy ISBNs. So an ISBN is basically like, the easiest way to describe it is a book's social security number.
Mm-hmm.
So you type that number in anywhere and it takes you directly to that book. So you actually have to buy those. And I didn't know that. So you can buy one for $125 or you can buy 10 for $295. And I was like, I wonder what I'm going to do. So about the 10 pack. So, and that's just like for future books to be written. Amazon will give you an ISBN, but that's only for them. So if you want your book at, Barnes & Noble, or if you want it like in a library or anywhere else that's not Amazon, you have to go somewhere else to publish as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going through Ingram Spark, which is a publication company as well. They're kind of like a distribution center. So they will print your book. It's $50 to actually list your book with them. And then, of course, there's royalties where there's X amount cost for the printing from the actual book and all that. But they make it so that you can expand your book anywhere. So like libraries can get it. Like I said, BarnesNoble.com can get it, Books A Million, etc. But yeah, it's a lot. It was a lot more than I thought it was going to be to start out. Because I mean, there are people that they don't have the money to put into getting their book published, so they won't pay for an editor. They'll do their own covers, and they'll do their own formatting. And sometimes you can really tell. And I didn't want that. I thought if I was going to publish this, I wanted it to be the best that it could be. Like I want it to seem like it's a traditionally published book. So that's kind of what I did. Luckily, the stimulus check that we got helped a lot with the cost for that. So. Yay.
There you go.
Yay, COVID.
Something came out good.
Yeah, so that's something I wasn't expecting is the upfront cost to get everything published. So, ouch.
What's the one piece of advice for if there's a listener here that wants to self-publish or be a writer that you would give?
Honestly, I would do the same thing that Jay Kristoff has said. I know it's really silly because he's my idol, like I told you guys. Like, I'm a fan. His number one advice and encouragement that he gives writers is that finishing a book is already 90% more than other people. there's something how I hear it like that. So basically, it's already better than all the other books because they're not done.
Mm-hmm.
Like so many people have tried writing a book and they just stop. So he always encourages you to actually like finish your book. To me, it was not to get discouraged, because like I said, when I first got those rejection letters from, traditional publishing, I was like super discouraged. I was like, I knew it. This is shit. I'm dumb. Like, this is a dream I should have never reached out for, because obviously people don't like it. And it's unfortunate because a lot of the people, if they don't like what your letter says, they won't even look at your actual manuscript. So they have no idea what your manuscript has, because all they do is read the letter and was like, meh, not for me. And especially realizing that urban fantasy isn't really a thriving genre right now, I feel like a lot of the queries or the literary agents who saw that were like, pass, without actually reading it, because it's not a thriving genre that people want right now. So I really wouldn't give up. I would just keep going, and I would honestly not invest, but ask for beta readers. Because they'll be honest with you. Yes, she's my best friend, but she was very much like, this doesn't make sense. Like, why is this like this? When it should be like this. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. Or you explain your case, and you're like, well, it's because later on that this happens. So, I mean, just getting somebody to read it is so helpful, because a lot of times we're scared to have people read our work because it's showing a very vulnerable part of us. Like, this is our love child. Please be nice to me as you read it. So a lot of people don't want people to read it because they're scared of the backlash. But I think just opening yourself up that one little step to have somebody read it will mean a lot and will actually help a lot with your decisions.
Okay. So last question. If you could have one completely useless superpower, what would it be? And it has to be useless.
Okay, I'm ready for this. And this is going to sound really stupid, but it's very specific to my job. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Unbreakable nails.
Oh.
Because I know it sounds really silly, but when my nails grow out, like, I have very like white, like pretty nails, but working at a bookstore, there's constantly times where you're sticking your hand between books on the shelf to either like make room or space them out, and I always break my nails. Always. And it makes me so angry because I'll be missing like 1 or 2 out of like the 10, and it just looks stupid. Like, I cut them all off. That is my useless, my loose. Yeah.
Good. No, that's perfect. I love that. Thank you for coming on and talking about your book and just catching up in general.
Yes. When
is it that the book is going to be out officially for anybody to order?
March 9th.
March 9th. All right.
Yeah, it's coming. It's scary. It's coming.
So, because this is actually going to go up on March 5th. So there we go.
Ah, okay, cool. Can't wait.
Is there any social media you want to give out? Is there a place to order the book online when it's ready? Should we just go to your Etsy?
So my Etsy actually was only for the pre-order copies. I'm not having any more on there. So that it will be available on Amazon, Kindle, and Barnes & Noble. If you go into Barnes & Noble, you will have to order it. They're not going to actively stock it unless it's my store. But yeah, those will be the places that you can get it. As for social media, you can follow me on Miss Cat Reads on TikTok. That's probably where I'm most active currently. Then there's it's_AllieCat on Instagram. I also post some stuff on there. And then I have Allie Wagner Writes, and that is my Facebook page where you can get actual book updates. So it's kind of like TikTok for personal and book stuff. Instagram is more like cosplay and like, hey, I'm doing this thing. And then my Facebook page is more like books. So kind of all over the place.
Get all of the Allie.
Get all of the Allie.
if you want to get a hold of me on Twitter, I am at Mitchipedia GEM. GEM stands for Geek Elite Media. The rest of Geek Elite Media is at Geek Elite Media on Twitter, at Geek Elite Media on Instagram, and Facebook.com/Geek Elite Media is our Facebook page. Check out archived episodes of this podcast and other podcasts on our website, geekelitemedia.com. If you are listening to this as a podcast, which you should be, whatever podcatcher you use, please rate and review us. It helps spread the word of our network. But until next time, this is Hey Mitch on the Geek Elite Media Network saying always remember to
Geek out.
geek out.
This concludes our broadcast.